Hello everyone, it's good to be back. My name's Libby and today I've brought some memorabilia from years gone by as we revisit our childhood days. I wonder how many of your childhood days you remember and how far back your memory goes. Hopefully this session will bring back some nostalgia and memories from your childhood, your children's childhood, your grandchildren's childhood, or even your great-grandchildren's childhood. So we're going to have a look at some memorabilia from the past today, and let's make a start with our first object, everyone. I wonder what it's going to be. Most of us had perhaps a teddy bear or a favourite loved toy in our lives. I wonder if you know how old this teddy bear is. Now, if I tell you that he wasn't my teddy originally, in fact, he belonged to one of my dad's cousins, and this teddy is many years old. But the question is he 50 years old, 100 years old, or 150 years old? How old do you think this teddy is? He's rather special, isn't he? Well done if you said that you thought he was probably more close to 100 years old, because in fact he's 93 years old this year. This teddy was made in 1928. 1928. And he's articulated. He moves his head. He moves his arms and his legs. Considering his age as a teddy bear, he's doing pretty well, don't you agree? And somewhere, if I look carefully, I can find his squeak. There it is. I wonder what the name of your teddy bear was when you were young. I remember I loved mine to bits. Did you have another favourite toy as a child, and if so, what was it? And was it something that you'd share with other children or simply play with by yourself? Did you generally have to share your toys in those days, or did you generally like to play on your own? Teddy bears. And there's lots of history behind the teddy bear as well, which we'll be looking at in one of our future sessions, hopefully. Well, a very warm welcome to you. My name is Libby, and today's session is called Childhood Days. It's all about our childhood memories of favourite playthings and toys, and those things that were around when we were young. Some of the things are items that were around when your children or your grandchildren or even your great-grandchildren were growing up. Let's find out what's coming next. How many of you have heard the term make, do and mend? If you have, you will know that it comes from wartime, from the Second World War specifically. Did you grow up during World War II? Were you a wartime child? If so, you will remember rationing, make, do and mend, and generally making sacrifices in the cause of war and a time of austerity. I found this hanger in a shop on my travels. And I found it fascinating because this little hanger suggests that it was a souvenir of wartime. The wooden part of the hanger looks as if it's been handcrafted, and obviously it's got its little metal hook at the top with a hand drilled hole at the top of the hanger, and very definitely a hand painted elephant in the picture. I've never seen a hanger like this anywhere else on my travels. Well, the hanger is quite suggestive of a childhood in the 1940s. And it's possible that a parent made this for their child in a time when toys couldn't easily be bought from the shops. A great deal of love would have gone into decorating the hanger as well. I wonder if you were a wartime child, whether your mother or your father made you a toy from paper or wood or metal or perhaps something else. Childhood during wartime. A warm welcome everyone. It's Childhood Memories from Childhood Days today, and my name is Libby and I'm back with some of your favourite memorabilia, just a little bit of memorabilia from my collection to share in the time we have, everyone. I wonder what's going to come next. Let's find out. Do you recognise this chap? A clue is that he was usually found in the kitchen. Yes, well done if you guessed that it is Mr. Home Pride of Home Pride flower fame. In fact, Mr. Home Pride was the symbol of Home Pride flower, especially during the 1960s and 70s, when this plastic figure would have been quite collectible. Now, perhaps you were someone who had a Mr. Home Pride collection. Maybe you collected these figures over the years. There were various different ones that you could collect in the series. And the nice thing about them was that you could unscrew their top, their hat, and underneath, of course, they were a flower shaker, just like this one. Mr. Home Pride brings back memories for me. As a small child, I remember visiting my auntie and uncle on Canvey Island, where my auntie had a Mr. Home Pride just like this one on her windowsill. And seeing this particular Mr. Home Pride brought back so many happy memories of warm childhoods spent in the summer of the 1970s back on Canvey Island. And I can remember being fascinated by Mr. Home Pride as a child. I wonder if you remember cooking with Home Pride flour, or perhaps your children liked to play with the figure. Maybe you had a collection. Mr. Home Pride of Home Pride flour. Well, our theme today, everyone, is childhood days, and I hope that you're following and enjoying so far. My name's Libby, and each session we have a different theme. Today's theme is all about objects, memorabilia, playthings and toys from years gone by, and hopefully you'll see some items that you remember from your own childhood, or perhaps your children's childhood, your grandchildren's childhood, or even your great-grandchildren's childhood. Let's see what's coming next. Something a little bit unusual, everyone. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, this is a reproduction. It's rather pretty, isn't it? It's a nice shape. And of course, it is a round tin. You might say that the style of this tin is Victoriana. And these tins have been popular over the years for containing various different materials. One example being sweets, particularly bonbons. And this particular tin held small lemon sweets. I wonder if you remember how we used to have toffee tins when we were younger with pictures on those tins. It might have been pictures of pets perhaps, or pictures of people in Victorian or Georgian times, or even pictures of people from the 18th century. I remember having a toffee tin with 3 clowns on the front at a time in my life when I was very fascinated by Pierrot and Columbine, harlequins and all sorts of clowns. This little tin, as I say, is a reproduction, and of course, going way back in time, children from previous decades and centuries would also have enjoyed having tins similar to this one. Do you remember when we used to have chocolate boxes with pictures on the covers, perhaps thatched cottages or idyllic scenes, or maybe dancing princesses? Often they were given as gifts for special occasions, or even with a romantic touch. Welcome everyone, my name's Libby and we are looking into childhood days today, everyone. Our session's theme is all about nostalgia from years gone by. So we're going to have a look at another object in just a moment and see whether it reminds you of the past. Rag dolls, little rag dolls. Did you ever have a rag doll, or did you have someone in your family that had one? This little rag doll belongs to me, and I'm very, very lucky because this rag doll was made by Mum's sister, my auntie, and she made another one for my sister who was just a year younger than me. My doll is called Patsy and my sister's doll was called Polly. And I think at that age we were absolutely delighted with our rag dolls, but what we didn't realise was all the beautiful handiwork that had gone into making them. And of course she's got a beautiful dress and even a petticoat and matching pants to go with it, and little shoes that match the colour of her hair. She's very well coordinated. And of course we used to make our dolls dance because of the legs being so flexible. Perhaps you had a favourite doll when you were a child, or maybe you even had a rag doll or a knitted doll that you carried around with you. I wonder if you remember what your doll's name was. Perhaps you had a pushchair or a pram or a little wagon or cart that you used to wheel your dolls around in, imagining that they were real babies. Maybe you've knitted a rag doll or sewn a doll for one of your children or your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren over the years. And if you ever watched the children's programme Play School on the television, you may remember there was a rag doll called Jemima. And I can remember being very young and being very keen to watch Jemima and see what she was doing. Rag dolls, everyone. We've got some pictures to look at next. You're probably wondering why I've brought some knitting and sewing patterns with me today. But childhood wouldn't be complete without knitted items, would it? Perhaps you're someone who's good at knitting and has knitted items for your children, your grandchildren, or your great-grandchildren. Maybe you've knitted for babies, little tots, or even teenagers. What interests me about knitting patterns from the past is when you look at the styles and how styles change, and also when you look at the price. This particular knitting pattern from 1973 was 5p. Now, you couldn't get a knitting pattern these days for 5p. It's very difficult to get anything at that particular price. And of course, if you're a keen knitter, you probably knitted for babies as well, and maybe it's something that you still do. If it's not, then perhaps you've got memories of knitting items like this in the past. It's interesting how even certain baby styles go in and out of fashion. Notice the difference in the price of this particular knitting pattern. It has one S in the corner at the top, telling me that it's 1 shilling. And the colour photograph on the front tells me that it probably wasn't before the late 1960s. So this picture was probably taken in the late 1960s, before we went decimal, for babies born around that time. Perhaps this was one of your children's growing up times, or maybe perhaps your own childhood took place at this particular time, or maybe you remember knitting for someone else. Knitting patterns, everyone, an essential part of childhood days. Well, a very warm welcome to you. My name is Libby, and today's session is all about remembering childhood days, and I hope that you're keeping as well can be. Well, hopefully the objects we have today will remind you of your own childhood, your children's childhood, your grandchildren's childhood, and even your great-grandchildren's childhood. Let's have a look at something else from our collection. Holidays, everyone. I wonder where your favourite place for a holiday is, and how many holiday souvenirs you might have collected over the years. I've got something to show you today from a holiday collection. This lovely towel was brought back by my mum. It comes from the 1960s, although as a child I can remember him hanging up in our house in my brother's bedroom. Made of cloth rather than paper, he looked rather like a tea towel picture to me. And in fact, as children, we absolutely loved him. And Mum sewed the back of the top of the picture so that a pole could be put through to make it into a proper picture. And the bottom, she sewed some fringing on. It's amazing how creative parents can be, and I was very, very lucky in that Mum would sew and make things for us back home, and Dad was also very creative too. And so this picture was a big favourite for our family. I wonder whether you had a favourite picture at home that was a bit of a talking point, whether it was a photograph or a painting perhaps, or a print, or maybe something else. As a child, I always felt sorry for the donkey, who would seem to be continually following that carrot without the chance of having it to eat. And as children, we used to laugh that the Mexican couldn't see where he was going under the large hat. Just one example of a holiday souvenir. Well, today's theme, everyone, is childhood days, and I hope that you're enjoying the memorabilia and the objects so far. My name's Libby, and we're going back through the years following some of our memories. I hope they bring back some nostalgia for you. Let's find out what's coming up next. You probably remember this character from your grandchildren's days, or even your great-grandchildren's days too. Created by John Cunliffe and Ivor Wood, it is of course Postman Pat. Postman Pat first came to our screens back in 1981, and his fame took off immediately with Jess, his black and white cat, and of course the characteristic theme tune to his programme. And of course I have got a 12-piece chunky jigsaw here made by Michael Stanfield and Company. The sort of thing that most children of the early 1980s would have been delighted with. Postman Pat by John Cunliffe and Ivor Wood. So let's find out what's coming next, everyone. I wonder what it's going to be. Buttons. Now you're probably thinking, well, buttons aren't particularly something that we associate with children, but these particular ones are, as you can see. This set of buttons would have been made probably in the late 1950s or possibly the early 1960s, and of course they were blue for a boy. And these buttons would have stood proudly on any little boy's knitted or sewn jacket. Notice at the bottom of the card, they are British made. Many things were still being made in Britain in those days. And even the card is quite attractive and decorative. It's said that more women made clothes in those days, and I wonder if you were a fond knitter or sewer. Perhaps you still do some sewing or knitting today. Or perhaps someone knitted for you. Perhaps you were the fond recipient of a nice jacket or two made by a fond mum, auntie, sister or grandmother. These buttons are made of plastic, but buttons have been made of various things over the years. Some original buttons were made of wood. Welcome to our nostalgic programme all about childhood days. A little clip taking us back down memory lane together with some objects and memorabilia from our past. Here's something else I'd like to show you from our collection. He's rather nice, isn't he? A somersaulting clown. And this one is, of course, made from wood. He's handcrafted and he would have been reasonably recently made, although there were many made like this clown going back through the decades. Do you remember when we were talking about austerity and wartime and how things would have been made from wood and perhaps handmade from paper? Little toys like this would have been fairly commonplace perhaps, and also in the decades before that. These days things are battery operated and computer operated and other things, and children derive pleasure from other things at times. However, if they see a little chap like this, he still brings a great deal of fascination. So we need to keep these sorts of toys well in circulation with our children of today. I have to say he's one of my favourites from the little collection we have today. And this clown, because he's actually made in modern times, will have been made with non-toxic paints, either acrylics or poster paints, and varnished with non-toxic varnish. In the 1970s, 80s and 1990s, Health and Safety Acts meant that toys, playthings and other objects had to be produced with paint and materials that were non-toxic. Unfortunately, before then, for many years, quite a lot of household objects and toys and playthings were painted with materials that had high contents of lead and similar chemicals and compounds and materials, meaning that things weren't terribly safe for children. And the dangers of mouthing toys, well, it goes without saying. Luckily today, things are so much safer. Wooden and handmade toys, everyone. I wonder if you ever had a wooden or handmade toy when you were a child, or perhaps you made one for a child of your own or even a grandchild. Childhood days, everyone. Well, we're almost at the end of our collection for today. We've just got one more thing to have a look at. So let's see what item we've got next. It's a poster, of course, from Crawford's Biscuits, no less. I wonder if you remember these posters from when you were young, or perhaps when you had children of your own. Perhaps you remember them in the 1950s when these sorts of posters were reasonably commonplace. Why? Because sugar rationing was coming to the end, and of course companies such as Crawford's wanted to make sure that people went back to buying their favourite products again. Austerity was beginning to come to a halt. And this picture would have been taken, well, this particular picture would have been painted maybe round about the mid-1950s, something like that. Probably 1954 or 1955. And tins of biscuits like this started to be available again around that time. Notice how the company are careful to include the appeal of Father Christmas in the pictures to ensure that children and families were included in the advertising and selling campaigns at that particular time. It's rather attractive to see that this picture has been hand painted and the effort that would have gone into making it at the time. Crawford's was a leading name in producing biscuits during the 1950s and prior to the 1950s and for many years afterwards. Well, it's almost the end of our session, everyone, and I hope you've enjoyed some nostalgia with me today. We will be coming back to a similar session in the future with more memorabilia for you to have a look at. I hope that those items, objects and very precious memories from the past brought some nostalgia for you today, and I hope that they'll give you something to remember in the nicest possible way. My name's Libby and I'll be back again soon with another session just for you. See you next time. Bye for now.